thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I'm going to hand over to Isabel Clement, Director of Wales for Wellbeing, to open up the launch for us.
Thank you very much, Kay, and welcome to everyone. It's with real pleasure and real pride that I welcome you all to the launch of Wheels for Wellbeing's 5th edition of the Guide to Inclusive Cycling. Thank you for being with us. It's only been 8 years since the launch of the first edition of this guide, and at the time we'd only just started to reflect on what we call the 10 principles of inclusive cycling, and we wanted to share those widely with everyone else. We published and launched our first edition at the occasion of our 10th anniversary in 2017. At the time, simply educating the world to the fact that disabled people did cycle and the fact that the Equality Act 2010 did apply to cycling were our priorities. It blew people's minds. The contents of our first guide were broad brush, but they were quite revolutionary. We quickly started to be asked further questions, particularly around technical questions about measurements of non-standard cycles, swept path analysis, what proportion of cycle parking spaces should be allocated for in cycle parking bays, etc. As a small organisation with no transport planning or engineering know-how on the staff, and hardly any staff at the time, we had a lot to learn if we wanted to help others apply the principles we'd just taught them. And how far we have come. We've learned fast. We are still learning. Since the early 2020s, we've had an amazing, small but amazing campaigns and policy team within Wheels for Wellbeing, and they have been getting us involved in all sorts of aspects of inclusion, mobility justice, and transport equity. We're much more grown up these days in how we talk about all of this. This team is led by Kay Inkle, who you've just heard from. It also includes Kate Ball and Ben Foley. And I wanted to mention them specifically at the beginning of this event, because without them, this 5th edition would not have seen the light of day. And I want to thank them all three profusely for the huge amount of work they have put into delivering this. I must also mention the Reese Jeffries Road Fund, and I am thanking them very much for their financial support, which has enabled us to put a lot of our team's time aside over the last few months to produce this incredible resource. And this launch will also be followed by a couple of training webinars, which you will hear about further in the next few weeks, and that also is being supported by the Reese Jeffries Fund. So thanks ever so much to them. So just to come back to the guide, what's different? What's happened over these years? Well, the last edition came out in 2022, and it focused a lot on several of our principles having been reflected in the then recently launched Department for Transport's National Cycle Design Guidance. But since then, the cycling agenda has broadened. It's much more about active travel now. It became about walking and cycling. We pushed very much for it to be walking, wheeling and cycling, because without the wheeling bit, disabled people seem to be very much forgotten within the walking agenda. We've also, we have broadened our focus to active travel and to what barriers need to be removed in all aspects of disabled people's active journeys. We talk about the wide array of mobility aids in this guide, micromobility equipment, which disabled people use, etc. So the other thing to note about this latest guide is that it is no longer in one guide the receptacle of all our knowledge, because it would have run to hundreds of pages. Our team have been very busy. So this is a summary document. It focuses people onto all of the aspects which they might want to think about, that we want them to think about, and then through hyperlinks and the beauty of technology, it takes you to longer documents also freely available on our website. So that's about the guide, and we are now launching it. And without further ado, I must introduce our first speaker. Dame Sarah Storey, the most decorated British Paralympian of all time and Greater Manchester's Active Travel Commissioner. Dame Sarah is only one of a few top-level athletes who have moved to working equally hard at bringing physical activity into the daily lives of people in their own communities, and with a particular focus on other disabled people. So for this, I thank you, Sarah, and I'm grateful to you for being here with us today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Thank you for that introduction, and also for inviting me to talk about what we're working on in Greater Manchester and some of my kind of lifelong beliefs about where cycling should be able to take us as people. So I think there is someone going to share my slides so that I have something to illustrate the words. So our first slide is just my introduction slide, and it's a picture of me at one of the Wheels for All centres, Debdale Park. And actually the lady on the front there is my auntie, who was 82 yesterday. So I live this and I bring it to my family, and I'm very well aware of the importance of this, not just for people who have physical disabilities, but for people who have mobility challenges as they grow older, and how that's so important to make sure that we incorporate all of what we're doing to help everybody across society. So I'm going to share a little bit what we're doing across Greater Manchester to ensure that we do deliver on active travel for everyone, and regardless of the type of cycle they would like to use. As I say, we're very aware many people live with mobility issues, and cycling can be the easiest way for them to have access to independent travel and movement. So by helping to eradicate some of the barriers of walking as well, for those people who are unable to walk, it helps to make sure that we're promoting a variety of different types of bikes, including hand-operated, arm-operated cycles, and also the very many mix of electric assist opportunities that are out there as well. So if we move on to my next slide, I'm just going to share what we have going on in Greater Manchester. So this is our commitment to universal accessibility across Greater Manchester. Active travel has very much become one of the modes of our transport system. So everything that applies to bus and tram in terms of access and opportunity also applies to active travel. And Transport for Greater Manchester have these values and aims for the integrated system that they're operating, or that they're going to end up operating when we bring the rail network into the B network as well. And this is just as important for multimodal journeys, so that we're catering for those as much as we are catering for a journey that's being made by one mode. So I've been Active Travel Commissioner in Greater Manchester for 3.5 years. And in my first 6 months, I updated the Active Travel mission and brought the principle of universal accessibility in to make sure we had a new focus on consistency across all of the modes. And perhaps most importantly, not forgetting that active travel is vital for disabled people and those who don't use public transport but still have mobility needs. As many people know, the B network, which is the Greater Manchester London style public transport system, it started as an active travel network. And so since 2023, when it expanded to include all of the bus network, and most recently it included multimodal ticketing across the tram network and the bus network together. So these milestones are incredibly important for active travel, because throughout the process of bringing public transport modes under the same brand as the active travel network, that meant the customer commitments had to work for everyone across all of the modes. And as you can see from them on the screen, safe, accessible, affordable, reliable, sustainable and accountable. As you can see from these commitments, they embed inclusion and express the ambition for using customer feedback to keep on improving what we're doing. So if we move on to the next slide, going to be able to share a little bit more about how we're trying to embed an inclusive approach across the work being done across Greater Manchester. So on this slide, we've got the picture of the Guide to Inclusive Cycling, as well as the Greater Manchester Strategy booklet. So that in July, we launched the new Greater Manchester Strategy, and that marked another milestone in the region. Within the Greater Manchester Strategy are a number of important pledges that help to address inequality and ensure that the work we're doing across all of the agendas of the region enables access for everybody. The transport system in Greater Manchester is seen as a key enabler, a key component of this, And alongside safety and the Vision Zero work, there's also action being taken to provide everyone with the opportunity to live a healthy life. And this is really crucial when we start to look at the importance of inclusive cycling. So intertwining these commitments into a region-wide strategy provides every aspect with a much stronger base on which to grow that opportunity for all people. And with the backing of these principles, we know we can deliver better on active travel because we've elevated the role and importance of cycling and active travel as a whole to be relevant to the other agendas, whilst we're also considering the barriers, such as safety, that do still prevent people from being able to engage. I can honestly say it's now a really great thing to be in a meeting and to ask what the provision has been considered from an inclusivity perspective, and to have that presented from the outset. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to take you through some of the work and how it ties to the recommendations of the guide that you're launching today, and what our work looks like on a day-to-day basis in Greater Manchester. So on this slide, I'm sharing an excerpt from our Streets for All design guide and one of the pages alongside the relevant parts of the Wheels for Wellbeing guide. And we start in Greater Manchester from the principle that every scheme and opportunity we must deliver, and it must work from the outset. So it's no good building something and then having to establish how it will work for everybody later. That's a retrofitting approach, and we know it's neither cost effective nor time efficient. Now, at this point, I often use the analogy of building the Olympic Village. Initially, the Olympic Village was just built for the Olympians. The Paralympic Games didn't exist alongside the Olympics as it does now. But as we move forward in time, when the design is built for both the Olympic and Paralympic Games in mind from the outset, that means that when the International Paralympic Committee come in after the Olympic Games to get everything set up for the Paralympians, nothing needs to be considered, because the design features that have originally been built into there will work for everybody. They work for those who have mobility needs or a different situation from a disabled person's perspective, and they're helpful to everybody. Nobody's going to be hindered by providing more space or wider doorways or more accessible bathrooms. That just helps for everybody. And the other basic principle within the work being done to build the cycling routes in Greater Manchester is the understanding that the national guidance is the absolute minimum option. This would really only be used where there isn't enough space, where those space constraints or there are other practical reasons why a greater width of cycleway or footway couldn't be achieved. And of course, the minimum standards that we want to strive for in Greater Manchester, we always want to try and exceed those standards. And I refer to that as providing a platinum standard network. What this means is that we're catering for the wider cycles being able to ride side by side and overtake each other. We're also considering the crossing times that might need to be extended to ensure people who need a little bit longer to get going from being stopped don't feel overly rushed. This isn't just helpful to disabled people or those who need a three-wheeler or a four-wheeler for their balance. It also ensures that parents using cargo bikes or delivery companies using cargo machines, that they're catered for too. And we often talk about the importance of recognising that designs that are built for disabled people are actually just better for everybody. Designs for cycle parking, seating areas and cycle hubs are also included within the design guide, and the principle being that we have these designs to help us future-proof our network as well, to make sure that we're considering whether or not there are new forms of micromobility that just haven't come to the market yet. So on the next slide, we've got a picture of our disability design reference group, and we know that a huge part of the design process is ensuring that what looks good on paper is also practical in real life. The dimensions of junctions, widths of roads, positioning of other facilities might make sense on a computer screen, but when they're brought to the delivery phase, there can be challenges that require last-minute tweaks. Of course, it's risky and relies on the people being involved in the delivery being able to make that informed decision. So in an attempt to overcome this, we have a number of different ways in Greater Manchester in which we try and make sure that we're consulting with and involving disabled people from the outset of the process. Earlier this year, we appointed Councillor Tracy Rawlings to be our disability champion on the B Network Committee. And then this is also backed up by other councillors who are inducted into the committee, having an understanding of the importance of the work needed to deliver that platinum standard network for the benefit of everybody. Working directly with Transport for Greater Manchester is also the people in this picture and others of the Disability Design Reference Group. So the Disability Design Reference Group is a diverse group of people who are engaged on a paid contract to provide direct input on accessibility features and design of the whole transport network. So the picture on this slide is just a small number of that group who were on one of their site visits. But the process of involving them is right from the inception of any scheme or proposal. They also give advice to TFGM, Transport for Greater Manchester, on customer information, staff training materials, and they do engage across the whole organisation, from the engineers right the way through to the design team. It's a uniquely and highly impactful group, and it's been operating in Greater Manchester now for almost 20 years. It was initially established during the course of the Metrolink extension work out to Ashton, and over time the group has expanded, and it's now one of the most important parts of the way that we continue to deliver an inclusive and accessible transport system. On the next slide, I can talk about some of the added impact of the DDRG, the Disability Design Reference Group work, because to add impact, we also have the Greater Manchester Accessible Cycle Network Group. And on this slide is a picture of the region, each of the 10 local authorities, and just the main groups that provide accessible cycling facilities via different centres. So in my previous role as Commissioner in South Yorkshire, I worked in partnership with the Wheels for All charity to set up a smaller version of this network. And then when I moved across to Greater Manchester, the work to establish a larger network of sites and to turn it into a national picture became a huge focus. Here in Greater Manchester, the network includes centres operated by other groups, whether that's a local authority or a different charity to Wheels for All. But Wheels for All are coordinating this network so that every part of the region has at least one centre, and the work being done at these centres is across a very broad range, from teaching people to ride, to supporting riders in learning basic cycle maintenance, and also helping those people who haven't quite found the right cycle for them, as well as including cycle loans and some wayfinding training outside of the centres as well. I've visited a number of the locations across this map. On many occasions, it's always impressive to see the breadth of opportunity that is now available, and interesting to constantly be talking about where we can add value in more centres and more opportunities. Of course, every centre has their regular riders, but they also boast graduates, if you like, those people who have been supported to build cycling into their everyday journeys and are now visiting the centres less because they have the opportunity to ride more every day on a day-to-day basis back at home. In addition to the collaboration across the region, the work is underway to strengthen the connections from outside of Greater Manchester, and to continue to develop new partnerships to enhance this service further, and then across the country as well. On the next slide, we do focus on the importance of multimodal journeys across the region. So it's naturally the way that we've turned our attention to the integration and accessibility of connections between modes. So on this slide, we've got a couple of pictures. One of them is of me coming off a tram with my bike. And the second one is a picture of the Mayor, Andy Burnham, with Tracy Rawlings, a disability campaign, and Nathaniel, local councillors, who were opening a lift at one of the stations in Greater Manchester that previously didn't have step-free access. So this focus has naturally turned attention to integration and accessibility of those connections, because some of the biggest barriers to being able to make multimodal journeys, we recognise for those people riding adapted cycles, are usually environmental factors, as well as the policy of the carriage of cycles or mobility aids on public transport. So rail station accessibility is a huge focus, and the enormous task of modernising stations that were built in Victorian times. The success of this work is underpinned by the initial customer commitments from that first slide. And so whilst everywhere has not got step-free access yet, the ambition to deliver this has never been stronger. We're grateful to the work of the campaigners. Nathaniel is in the yellow tie in this picture. We're really grateful to Nathaniel in particular for making sure that this never comes out of the spotlight, and for working behind the scenes with us to make sure that there's ongoing work to secure the funding to enable that modernisation. In addition, the carriage of cycles and mobility aids, we just go back a slide. In addition, the carriage of cycles and mobility aids on our trams has been overhauled. So when I first arrived in Greater Manchester, there was a really long-winded and very unrealistic route to receiving a permit for the use of a mobility aid on the tram. This process is required under health and safety rules, but it wasn't a very user-friendly way of doing things, and it did look incredibly discriminatory to me. So this process has been streamlined, and the addition of the carriage of bikes on trams was trialled. And when I say bikes, it was just the name of the trial. It meant all cycles. So it was a broad trial of in-person engagement undertaken by Transport for Greater Manchester with the help of volunteers who ride many different types of cycle. And the overall recommendations are still being brought forward, mainly from an operational perspective, because they're not very quick due to the internal carriage adjustments that are going to be needed. Once we're complete, this will serve to increase capacity, not just for wheelchair users, but also the carriage of cycles alongside wheelchair users, making sure that we don't take the same space for every type of mobility aid in that one small space that's usually allocated. There'll continue to be size restrictions required for health and safety reasons, but when complete, there's going to be much more flexibility for a range of different people who ride bikes and other cycles. And what was interesting about the engagement process during the course of the trial was it provided an insight into the role of Greater Manchester Cycle Hire. The value of the carriage of bikes on trams is strengthened, because we often talk about building a system that works for all different types of bikes, but we don't often consider what an adapted bike is. We instantly think about 3 wheels, 4 wheels, but for people like me who need adapted brakes on a standard cycle, that's not catered for in the GM Cycle Hire. So it provided us with an opportunity to educate people further about what we mean when we talk about an adaptation, and the vital principle in customer commitment being that everyone can use us. That means people like me who need a brake adaptation and therefore can't just jump on a GM Cycle Hire. So the bikes on trams policy that is being brought forward is going to help enable everybody to take a cycle where they need to go if they can't use that cycle hire, and also helps us to break down some of those barriers about the cycling stereotypes and who rides a bike and what sort of adaptations are adaptations. So as we move towards the end, the next slide, we talk about the importance of integrating public transport into the B network, not just to give greater attention to the importance of customer feedback, but also to have proactive measures that can be undertaken to make sure customer experience is good from the outset. In this picture, we've got a picture of our B network bus with 2 of our staff from Transport for Greater Manchester, and they're 2 of the staff that will have undergone some of the training that the Disability Design Reference Group helped to support us in designing. So whether it's dementia training for staff to having female transport safety officers available for customers in distress, female customers in distress, there's never a meeting goes by that I'm part of where there isn't consideration given for the principle that every customer is catered for. And this culture is really important because it's not been hard to implement. Everyone who I come across understands that the jewel in the crown of a good public transport system is that everyone can use us and they can feel safe and they've got a reliable and punctual journey regardless of their personal circumstance. Of course, there's always work to do, and whether there's something much bigger like ensuring material is shared in a wider range of languages, or a genuine mistake when a video is posted before the words on the screen have been added, the underlying principle of the way we operate is that no one should be excluded. And if for some unintended reason they are, then we work to fix it as a priority to try and make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. And I've witnessed firsthand some of the training being used in situations where customers with additional support have been involved. And it's always heartening to see an approach in action and then subsequently be around the table where hear the question, how can we improve? So my final slide is just an infographic showing you the active travel mission and how it shapes in Greater Manchester. I've spoken to the various different parts of this mission during the course of the presentation, but this is where it all comes together. We currently have 5 key priorities, and these could be replaced by the key priorities of any mode, just by way of example, and how it might work in delivering the public transport modes alongside it. But whichever priority you pick out here, the work being done is from that initial principle that everyone can use us, the underlying understanding that if we design things to that platinum standard, then the outcome benefits everyone, and not just for those with accessibility considerations. Fundamentally, there's no one at a disadvantage once it's complete. But the way that we communicate that and the transparency of interactions with customers is absolutely vital. So I hope it's been a helpful whistle-stop tour of the work that's happening in Greater Manchester. The recommendations of the guide resonate with us so strongly. And here on this sort of final goodbye slide are the contact details, which we can be passed on to you if you'd like to have them after, if you can't read them on the screen. But the recommendations of this guide really do resonate with us so strongly, as you can see. And I look forward to continuing to shine a light on the rest of the work and progress that is needed across the region and further afield. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really interesting. Really good to see that the principles that we highlight throughout our guide are already in action in Greater Manchester. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to swiftly move on to introducing our second speaker, who is Phil Jones. Again, many people will know Phil. He is the founder and chairman of PJA, Phil Jones Associates, and I consider Phil as a bit of a fairy godmother to Wheels for Wellbeing. I'm sure you'll like that, Phil, because we're in those very early days when we were just starting to gather our thoughts and formulate our thoughts and start to want to influence the world of cycling and then the broader world of active travel. Phil was always there, knowing what was going on the ground and opening doors for us to be able to, one, learn fast, and two, talk to the right people, be at the right table. So Phil, thank you for all of that and for being here today, helping us to launch our guide.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Isabel. I don't think I've ever been called a fairy godmother before, but I quite like that. So thank you very much to Wheels for Wellbeing for asking me to speak at the webinar today. And just to give you a viewpoint from the type of people, or at least some of them, that the guide is aimed at. As Isabel said, I'm a founder of a consultancy. We do a lot of work on transport and streets, particularly active travel. In my career, I've produced lots of guidance. I was involved in Manual for Streets, LTM 120, and now working on the Rural Design Guide for Active Travel England. So I know how hard it is. So congratulations to Wheels for Wellbeing. As you said, now the 5th edition of the guide in 8 years, which is quite incredible. And it wasn't until recently I realised that Wheels for Wellbeing had coined the term wheeling, which is now so central to our thinking. And the number of times recently I've written walking, wheeling and cycling in the draft Rural Design Guide. It doesn't bear thinking about. And so words and even so much more pictures matter so much. And it's kind of mandatory now that we have to mention artificial intelligence in every meeting and session. So I asked Microsoft Copilot, please tell me, what does a typical cyclist look like? And I got the answer, and it was quite promising. So I read the words, and the words say, the idea of a typical cyclist, actually quite broad, all shapes, sizes, ages, and background. I thought that's great. And AI, as we know, is very helpful. And it went on to say, if you'd like, I can also generate an illustration of a typical cyclist. And I said, well, yes, please do that. And here it is. It ticks all the boxes. So this is a picture of a person who's male, middle-aged, wearing lycra and a helmet, of course importantly has a beard, and maybe most significantly riding a bike with no mudguards. And so what does this tell us? Well, we know that AI doesn't think, despite the term intelligence. It just looks for patterns in data. And the thing that AI therefore reveals is what the bias in the data is. And as we can see, there's a strong bias in the data that it crawls on the web, and that just reflects what society thinks, that this is what a cyclist looks like. And so that's the challenge that I think we all have, working in this field. But I'm really pleased to say that is changing, at least in the professional sphere that I'm in, if not in the general public. What I've put on the screen now is the cover of LTN 208, the previous document. The LTN 120 changed, and the person riding on the cover on that bike on the cover is again male, wearing a fairly conventional bike, wearing a cycle helmet, and riding on a cycle lane with advisory white paint next to between them and a goods vehicle, and that could have been our AI cyclist, I think. But I'm really pleased that when we moved to LTN 120, which I've now put the cover on, that changed a lot of things. And it was really a representation, I think, of government catching up with the best local authorities. That was what LTN 120 did. It didn't really break new ground. It actually built on the work of people like Brian Deegan and others, then at Transport for London, but subsequently at TFGM, who done a lot of the hard thinking. And this quote, inclusive cycling's underlying theme throughout. People of all ages and abilities are considered. That's in the foreword, and that was the biggest shift that we achieved at that time with the help of Wales for Wellbeing. And I did a quick count. The word inclusive appeared in LTN 208 twice, and LTN 120 it's 29 times, which I think maybe just shows the change. And Wales for Wellbeing, as Isabel hinted at, were really helpful. Was represented on the sounding board that challenged us when we were doing that, and contributed a lot to the thinking. And I really like this quote, which talks about the proportion of disabled Londoners who sometimes use a cycle, 15%, slightly less than for non-disabled Londoners, 18%. And that came from the first edition of the Guide for Inclusive Cycling that predated LTN 120. And here's one of my favourite pictures from LTN 120. It shows Kevin Hickman of Wales for Wellbeing, who's also really helpful, and has been involved so much in the work of the organisation. Cycling on a recumbent cycle in the snow in London, because as we know, the pictures matter a lot more than the words that we put into guidance. And so here's the cover now of the original guide that from 2017 that Wales for Wellbeing produced that influenced LTN 120 so much. And we now have moved on to a new edition, which is packed with more information, which I've selected a few little snippets here. So we've got up-to-date information on why disabled people cycling. Well, there's a pie chart here. Who would have thought? Well, it's because cycling is easier, is what most people say. What type of cycle they use, and again, contrary to what many people think, the most common is the standard two-wheeled bicycle, perhaps with some special adaptations that Sarah talked about. We've got some really useful references to the most important numbers in LTN 120 about the level of traffic flow and speed that most people are prepared to tolerate when they're cycling on the carriageway. We've got some useful images that show what inclusive cycle parking looks like, and the importance of crossfall, which if you only ride a bicycle, you won't really get. And I often will challenge designers and local authorities, perhaps that we're working with or reviewing schemes, that they haven't really thought about the other direction and crossfall. So all this level of detail that's in the guide is really important to local authorities and consultants like me who plan and design the cycle infrastructure that they are working towards. But it's aimed at more people than that. So I've put on the screen now some quotes from the document, because the talk about what I would consider Wales for Wellbeing's very reasonable asks of government, for example, to explicitly include disabled people as defined in the Equality Act as users of micromobility devices, and to explicitly designate cyclists as mobility aids when used by disabled people to assist or replace walking and wheeling, and when used at walking speed in pedestrianised areas. That clearly people who have difficulty walking, signs that say cyclists dismount or being told to dismount when they're cycling on their way to somewhere or at the end of their journey is a real problem. And we've been able to, another piece of guidance that we've worked on recently for Active Travel England is a guide to cycle parking, which will be coming out fairly soon, I think. And we were talking about residential cycle parking in that. And we were able to make the point that if you're parking your cycle, then there has to be really very close to your destination if you have difficulty or inability to walk to where you're getting to be. These things really, really matter. So moving on, I've put on now a screen grab from the document that just shows that it's absolutely packed with information and links that show where further documents and confirmation of where the numbers come from that are in there. So it is as Isabel said, it is an initial jumping off point to a lot more information, and much of that information, which I've now moved on to, are information that Wheels for Wellbeing produce themselves. And this is the answer to the question I asked Kay when I looked at the guide and said, well, there's a lot less in here that was in the 4th edition about the actual details of infrastructure. And she quite sensibly said, oh, it's because it doesn't fit anymore. And so we have the libraries like this, a couple of screen grabs of the document that again talks about cross-4, why it matters and how to get it right, because it is a fundamental thing if you're no longer designing for the standard bicycle. So the question, of course, is, will it work? And I guess my experience, things like Manual for Streets, is that guidance only takes you so far. A document is only a document. It doesn't affect the world unless people read it. Those people who have important that it influences, they read it, they think it's important, and they act on it. And the best authorities like TFGM get this. They're already working with Wheels for Wellbeing or other similar organisations, and they'll pick up on that thinking as it emerges. But getting some authorities to even follow existing best practices is hard. Here's a photograph of a scheme, I won't say where it is, that went in fairly recently, somehow got through the LTM 120 filter, and it ticks lots of boxes in the don't do list. Paint on the footway, no priority across the side road, cyclist dismount, and then do what? I've never seen a sign yet that says cyclists get back on, or what to do when you've dismounted. And this lovely photograph, this is a very low down photograph of a cycle track that's just divided by white paint from the footway that shows how it goes up and down at every driveway. And who would like to ride that on a tricycle? I'm not sure. Maybe quite fun. I don't know. At a fun fair. So, just in conclusion, just want to end on a positive note. It's great to see Wheels for Wellbeing continue to develop its expert guidance and really influence not just local authorities and consultants that are doing well, and ones maybe that are doing not so badly, but also influence government, bring in sensible changes to law, strengthen the guidance and checks used by Active Travel England to ensure we go on from catering only for this person, which is our AI cyclist that we saw previously, to this one, which shows a confident lady riding a recumbent tricycle across a cycle crossing that wasn't even lawful 10 years ago. So things move on. Really pleased that Wheels for Wellbeing is doing such great work, and thank you for asking me to speak today. Thank you.
Bill, thank you so much for your presentation and your support, and we will continue to push those doors and change the world, hopefully in real term. Now I'm going to very quickly pass on to our colleague Kate Ball, who is one of our amazing campaigns and policy team members, and who actually not only wrote a lot of the technical guidance, but also did all of the graphic design of the actual guide. Kate, over to you, because we're running out of time, but we do want to hear you properly. So over to you. We might squeeze the questions a little bit, but we don't want to squeeze you out.
Thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Kate. I'm one of the campaigns and policy leads, as Isabella said, and thank you so much to Sarah and Phil, who've gone over a lot of the basic points that I'm needing to make, which is absolutely fantastic, and for showing off all of our key highlight points and principles, and a lot of the quotes and the referencing that we've been doing within the guide, which is some of the really important things. So on our cover slide, we've got some people at one of our fitting sessions for disabled cyclists going for our Wheels for Me cycle loan scheme, where people can borrow cycles to ride. We've got some examples of good practice in temporary road schemes with a cyclist dismount and lesser mobility aid on a very constrained site, which meant that disabled people walking, wheeling and cycling could continue to get through roadworks in a way that isn't usually possible. And we've got an example of panel discussions, the sorts of work that we do, influencing designers, decision makers, campaigners, assisting with campaigns and assisting with ensuring that we get good practice across all areas of inclusive cycling and active travel. So what's in the guide and why should you bother reading it? So it talks a bit about who we are, who are Wheels for Wellbeing, what do we do, what's our expertise. The whole focus here, disability equity and mobility justice, that's the really big thing that we do. It's in everything that we go through. And the guide contains loads on evidence around active travel. What are the current rules? What are the regulations? What do we think they should be? It's got bits of technical details. As Phil has said, it's not fully technical detailed. It is an overview, but it links and references all sorts of other things. We've got case studies as well, so you get examples of why and where. And again, you can link to a lot more case studies on our websites. We're looking at why should cycling be accessible. We here in this meeting almost certainly are all able to sort of talk about the benefits for access to society, education, health, well-being, physical benefits, mental benefits, social benefits. It's all over the place, but you sometimes need the evidence to hand on to other people, and we've tried to reference and link to all of that. And the principle is looking at how we can make active travel, including cycling, accessible to all disabled people. And in the middle, we've got the picture of the cover that a number of other people have shown. So we've got the Guide to Inclusive Cycling, 5th edition, September 2025, with the picture of a person on a semi-recumbent tricycle crossing the road on a cycle permitted crossing in front of a double-decker bus. So having that inclusion and a safe space, making sure that people can make the journeys that they want and need to make when they want and need to make them. We're looking at where all this stuff comes from. We're not making these things up out of nowhere. As we've mentioned, everything is very thoroughly referenced, and we will say when something has come from our lived experience. We are a disabled people's organisation. We spend a lot of time talking as disabled people to disabled people. We take a pan-impairment approach, so that means that people with all sorts of different disabilities, life experiences, who want to do all sorts of different things, all have input into what we're doing, and we try and make sure that everybody's needs and interests and intersectional experiences are taken into account. We read all the research, we go through reports, we collaborate, and we help to produce research and reports and make sure that there's as much evidence as possible. We're using national and international sources from across all 4 nations in the UK. Things like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, things like the Dutch cycle design manuals and other international design manuals, looking for best practice, looking for ideas. Sometimes it's what we think would be a great plan to try out. Sometimes it's, oh, we're not so sure about this, and this is why. So then if we look at the actual guide itself, the document that we've got, we'll just talk a little bit through how we anticipate it getting used, or what you might want to think about, why you might want to read it. So the format's available. It's directly online, HTML. That is probably not the easiest version to read for most people. If you can't download it, then that's great, and it should work well with screen readers, but it's not the most beautifully formatted. You lose things like the page numbers. There are the downloadable Word and PDF versions, which should very much look the same as each other. If you don't want to accidentally move things around, then use the PDF, and it's a bit of a smaller file. If you need to change formats, colours, use a translator or anything else, use the Word version. BSL and easy read versions of the foreword and the summary recommendations are going to be coming up on the website, along with the video of this presentation as well, this whole event. So that will be coming, but they're not up there yet. We've got general accessibility features. We have followed as far as we possibly can, and we think we've hit most points of the national and expert guidance that we've been given on accessibility to try and make sure as many people as possible can read the same document so that everybody is getting the same information when they want to look at it without having to ask for permission to access things, without having to ask for different formats. And getting around the guide, it is using heading systems, so you should be able to click between different sections very easily, especially again if you're using screen readers and other assistive technology. Just watch out, the cover is page number 0, not page number 1, which is a fairly typical thing. So if we just have a look at the guide itself and how sort of getting around that works, hopefully everyone can see the guide now. So we've got the cover of the guide, and we can scroll down and you immediately, this is the PDF version, and you immediately get to the contents. So looking at what we're doing, what the guide contains, a bit of an overview, talking about the social model of disability and mobility, justice and equity, which is what underpins absolutely everything that we're doing. Then talking a bit more detail about what disabled people need in cycling. We've got a specific focus here on neurodivergence in cycling, because that's something we really think has been underserved. People talk about mobility impairments a lot. We're very visible as mobility impaired people, but neurodivergence, so covering a huge range of different people, from autistic people, people with ADHD, people with brain injuries, people with learning disabilities. It's an absolutely huge different range of people, and making sure that they are seen as users of cycling and active travel and are facilitated, their specific needs are facilitated as they absolutely should be. And you can have a look through, and at any of the different sections you think, oh, that looks interesting, I'm not sure what that is, or that's the bit that I need, and you can click on the links. If you look at public realm infrastructure and go through, you can see when you're in the sections, they are very short. As Phil said, the content is not huge on any single bit, but it does point you to a lot of different directions. And that's the point of this guide, really. It's to point people at different resources that they might want or need to use for different purposes. So we're pointing at British standards here, publicly accessible standards. This is the standard. PAS 6463 is a free to access standard. Neurodiversity and the built environment. So it is a really good one to have a read. I'd recommend that one. And then we've got these little bits of superscript numbers, number 60, 61, 62. Those are all chapter end references. So at the end of every chapter in the PDF or Word version, at the end of the whole document on the HTML version, you'll find all the references to everything that we're talking about as far as possible. The links that are within the document are to our own guide sheet. So this one says seating. So I'll have a look at that. And again, we've got the HTML version, the direct online version, but if you click on the guide sheet, it's likely to look a lot nicer for most people to read. And I got told to talk about what my favourite sort of infrastructure is. And I thought, actually, I don't have a favourite, but my very favourite thing is this sort of work. And it's what I think Wheels for Wellbeing do really well, which is identifying where there are gaps in guidance, gaps in in understanding, and then hunting out, talking to lots of different disabled people's organisations, designers, people who are installing these things, people who are making different things, people with a whole range of different ideas, working out what's really needed, pulling it all together if there isn't already something we can just point people at very easily, and creating something, co-producing in collaboration with lots of different people, something that others can use to campaign for better provision or to provide better provision, depending on who they are. So for this one, we've got a key principle, after we've done a lot of talking, of seating provision in all locations should be accessible in design and sufficient in quantity. So elaborating a little bit, I'm just being told that the seating guide isn't showing, so I'm going to go back. When is that showing, Kay?
You're still on the guide. It's not, the link hasn't gone through to the seating guide.
Okay, that's a shame, because I can talk about seats for absolutely ages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back onto the slides, the current slide, because I don't know what's happened. That's worked in all of our testing, hasn't it? So we're just going to flip on one more. But thanks for Phil for having the screenshots available of some of the different guide sheets there. So what I was sort of talking through was not the actual contents of anything, but the fact that what we're doing is pulling together things from a lot of different organisations, identifying where there are gaps in provision, and whether it's something like bus stop bypasses, which have been very controversial at the moment, and making sure we're co-producing different ideas and coming to agreements with the lots of different organisations representing people with visual impairments and other different disability groups who've got different ideas and different needs, and coming to agreed positions and perspectives, or whether it's something where there just is a gap in what's been considered to date, like what sorts of materials should you make a bench out of, and what are the pros and cons of different ones. And there often aren't answers. There are often a series of questions that you can put in, or lots of good answers, and a whole range of things that we can say, well, consider these different bits. And as long as you hit these points, it'll probably be pretty good. And it's really great being able to have those discussions. And as I've said, that's what I think we do really well. So the 5th edition Guide to Inclusive Cycling is a quick tour of cycling and active travel accessibility. We are including quite explicitly, including in our pictures, mobility scooters and other powered aids like e-scooters that need to be used on cycle type infrastructure a lot of the time. It doesn't contain enough information to develop a project or carry out a campaign by yourselves, but what it does do is link to a lot of extra resources that are Wheels for Wellbeing resources and a lot of external resources. Often we don't have the thing that people want because we haven't yet produced it. But if you ask, we'll probably be able to either point you at some people who do have things, point you at the existing national, international evidence resources on something, or we will talk to a whole load of people and see what we can put together. And that's how we decide what we're going to do. It is literally from disabled people, DPOs, designers, decision makers coming to us and saying, has anyone thought about this yet? And then we'll see what we can do. We'll see what needs doing, see who's already got the ideas, and see what we can put together. And so please do get in touch if you've got any queries, or if you think we've got something wrong, if you think there's something we've missed out. There's lots more on our website. It's not just the guide, it's not just the resources. We've also got the option to sign up for inclusive cycling sessions and our Wheels for Me cycle loan scheme. Those are London-based only at the moment. We've also got our nationwide disabled cycling activists network that's online, and all disabled people and all cycling allies, active travel allies, are very, very welcome to join. We've got our free high quality photo bank of disabled people cycling, and anyone across any area of the UK or more widely is very welcome to get in touch to request support with campaigning, training, consultancy, and any other collaborative work they'd like to do. Thanks so much for listening.
Wow, thank you, Kate. That was a whistle-stop tour of the guide and how it was put together and where it might go next. Do get in touch. We can start working on the 6th edition as soon as this one's been launched. Thanks ever so much, Kay. I'm going to hand back over to you. You were going to try and get a couple of questions discussed, but we've only got 3 minutes left. No pressure.
So yeah, thank you to everybody who submitted questions both in advance of today and in the chat. A number of the questions that were submitted in advance have been touched on in terms of the presentations, certainly around our position around other mobility aids than cycles in cycle lanes, around the need to highlight the access needs of neurodivergent cyclists. We did have a couple of questions submitted in advance, both of which relate to issues around accessibility of canals as routes for people to cycle down, what the speakers' feelings about the accessibility of canals are, and who is responsible for those, and is there a national picture of which canals, if any, meet accessibility standards. So anything in those vein around cycling accessibility and active travel accessibility on canal routes. And we'll just go in the order of speakers. So Sarah, then Phil, and then Kate.
Thank you. So when it comes to canals, we work in partnership sometimes with Sustrans and the Canals and River Trust. Sometimes there's an opportunity to build funding in. They're not the most accessible of places, but it's important that everyone does have access to nature. So where it is possible to make those routes more accessible. But we also know that even without that accessibility challenge, they're not necessarily an option year round. So I always advocate for having those routes alongside the routes that are sort of surface level, if you like, alongside the roads, the off-road routes that aren't next to the water, because in the wintertime it can be the most treacherous of places, regardless of the types of wheels. Trees falling down. I arrived at an event having had to climb through a tree from a canal route, covered in mud, just to prove the point to somebody who was advocating against a cycle route that was going alongside the pavement, the footway. So there are limitations regardless of those access needs. And I think it's about maximising it as an asset, but not losing sight of the fact that we need to provide alternative routes and make sure that there's choice for everybody.
Thank you. And Phil?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it's interesting because, as I mentioned, the rural design guide that I'm working on with WSP at the moment for Active Travel England, and we spent a lot of time scratching our head around canals because they can be a fantastic route for walking and cycling, obviously level and peaceful and so on, but they are historic artifacts, and the towpaths were designed for towing barges. That's what they're kind of working environments really, and they're incredibly constrained by in many situations by the Victorian or even before infrastructure. So and kind of the crust are very, very sympathetic to the needs of people walking and cycling, and they genuinely want to do the best, but it's not always possible to achieve something that is meets desirable best practice when it comes to that, because there's so many constraints and the needs of other users like anglers and so on. So I think, as Sarah said, in many cases they are the right thing to do, but in other cases where it's not possible to reach the required standard for making fully inclusive, we have to think about an alternative. So I think they're an opportunity, but they're not the only solution that we can use.
Thanks, Phil and Kate.
So I think what I'll be saying is very in line with what Sarah and Phil have said. You can't make a very narrow strip into an accessible route for active travel, for making utility journeys, because if you're encouraging people to cycle journeys that they need to make multiple times a day, their school runs, their work runs, getting to the shops, getting to the doctors, going and visiting their auntie, you've got lots of people needing to try and move fast along a very small space. That's not going to work out. But we still need these spaces that are in nature, that are lovely to be in, that are peaceful, that are for slow moving, to be really accessible for everybody, including people using non-standard cycles. So we need the accessibility of all the towpaths to be really, really good. That doesn't turn them into active travel routes. We still need the route, as Sarah's mentioned, for use all year round, all times of day and night, that's overlooked, that's safe to be on, low risk of antisocial behaviour and abuse, that's next to the road, where you can get rescued if you break down, where you can turn around and get off if there's a problem. So you've got two different things going on. You need both.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm conscious that we are just running over time, so I'm afraid we're going to have to limit the questions. If you have any further questions, hopefully all the answers are in the guide. We did have a very interesting one about e-bikes and fires, the whole issues around that at the moment. And again, that is something that we have put our own guidance and position statement out on, which you will find on the website. I'm going to hand back to Isabel for thanks and for closing.
Thank you very much to all our speakers, and Kate and Ben from the team for putting this amazing guide together, to Reece Jeffries Road Fund for funding us to be able to take the time to update our guide, and who knows when the 6th edition will be out, but please take the time to flick through the guide, enjoy it, feedback to us if anything you find in there is either not answering all your questions, or you feel that we've got anything wrong. Thank you ever so much for attending this event. It's been amazing to be able to formally launch our latest guide, and I reckon, by my reckoning, edition 5 will probably have a different name, but we hadn't had time to think about that. But it's no longer just cycling, so we probably need to get on and think about that. Thanks ever so much to everybody and to our BSL interpreters, and see you all at events or online or in the real world on a cycle ride somewhere. Bye bye.